The last 3 years, Visma have been focusing on how to modernize the way that I design, develop, deliver, and operate the cloud services, which has been leading to a large-scale DevOps transformation. And today, the Chief Cloud Architect is here to tell us all about it. So please welcome Alexander Lystad.
I'm Alex, Chief Cloud Architect in Visma Enterprise. And I'm here to talk about our DevOps journey for the past 3.5 years. If you're not familiar with Visma from before, what you need to know for this talk is that we're a fairly large and distributed organization, and that we make lots and lots and lots of cloud software. Over the past 3.5 years, we have tried to work in a fairly structured way in terms of how we develop, deliver, and operate cloud services. And I thought I would start with some of the major changes we have made, and then we'll go through how we work towards those goals. So, we have moved from a situation where we had development teams on one side of the wall, operation teams on the other side of the wall, to a situation where we today have autonomous and independent teams that are responsible for both development and operations. In fact, we have 40 teams that work like this today. It's not all teams in our organization yet, but we're making progress. And these teams are responsible for everything from design, development, making infrastructure changes, testing, implementing monitoring, but also reacting to that monitoring, handling incidents, and everything in between. The average team size is about 8 to 9 team members. We have also been able to increase our release frequency. So 3.5 years ago, a Visma cloud service might be updated once every 2 months. But today, at least among the teams that I'm focusing on, we are making around 6 deployments to production per month per cloud service on average. There is still a lot of room for us to improve here, but the most active teams deploy to production about 30 times a month. So how did we get started with this large-scale change? At the end of 2014, we were experiencing a lot of pains related to how we were working at the time. So I could give you probably 50 examples, but I'll limit myself to 3. So the first example, an operations team would sometimes respond to an incident in production. But sometimes they would not have the necessary context or competence to actually resolve that problem. Now, why was that? Because often that competence and context was in the development team. They were the people who created the service and knew how it was supposed to work. They knew the users, the use cases, and the domain, etc. So there was a misalignment in terms of competence and responsibility. Second example, sometimes an operations team would request an improvement. Additional logging maybe, more automation of the deployment process. But the development team would not always prioritize those things. Now, why was that? Because the development team did not necessarily feel the negative consequences of not doing those things. So there was a misalignment of incentives as well. And the third example, I think, is a combination of both. So often, I would see that development teams did not have access to good monitoring information, because monitoring was seen as an operations responsibility. But again, they didn't necessarily have the right context and competence to do that. So what we ended up with was monitoring that was overly focused on infrastructure and not monitoring about the overall health of the cloud service or the performance or user behavior or user experience, those kinds of things. We also had several challenges related to a very heterogeneous environment. So I already told you that Visma creates lots and lots of different cloud software, and we don't have one technology stack for all of that, unfortunately. Or fortunately, for some reasons. We have lots of different technologies. Back in 2014, 2015, we also used many different hosting vendors in addition to hosting stuff ourselves. And we had many different responsibility models, meaning that how a development team would interface with an operations team, that was not done in one way. It was done in dozens of different ways. So in January of 2015, we gathered 7 people in what would be the first of many workshops where we tried to address this problem. And we tried to answer the question, if we are going to efficiently develop, deliver, and operate successful cloud services, how should we be organized? And how should we work? We tried really hard to free ourselves from our current circumstances. We tried to start with a blank slate, and we tried to describe an ideal target state. And we call this target state the Visma Cloud Delivery Model, or VCDM for short. Now, based on what I told you and based on our experiences, we knew from the beginning that we needed to break down the wall between development and operations. And at the time, it seemed very natural to us that the solution would be to take operations responsibility and add it to the development team. But of course, that had lots of other consequences that we had to think about as well, like adding operations competence, because that was a weakness in our development teams. To highlight the difference between this new type of team from the traditional development team, we gave it a new name. So we call these teams service delivery teams. And this is to underline the fact that you're not just responsible for building a product and throwing it over the wall to someone else, but you are continuously responsible for delivering a good cloud service to the customers. We also wanted to move towards continuous delivery. We wanted the capability to make small changes to our cloud services, quickly get them into production, into the hands of our customers and end users. We wanted to be able to learn from those changes, get feedback from monitoring systems, from users, from customers, and we wanted to take those insights back into the development process. And again, this had many, many implications on how we should be organized and how we should work. We already knew that monitoring was a weakness. We knew we had to doubly improve in that area. Automated testing and automated deployment were not new concepts to us, but we realized we had to focus a lot more on them. So we tried to build all of these things into our model. So at the end of several workshops in the beginning of 2015, we had an initial draft of our model. It contained some core principles, mostly focused around DevOps and continuous delivery. We had described an organization, how we should be organized to be successful. So we had described a service delivery team, what their responsibility should be like, what roles are necessary to be a well-functioning service delivery team, and how that team would interface with other parts of the organization. We had described some processes, how we should work. How should we work with testing? How should we work with releases? How should we work with monitoring and incident handling? And we had also described some technical requirements that we thought were, again, necessary to successfully deliver cloud services. So a quick example of that would be zero downtime deployment, which was not necessarily an obvious thing for us in all cases 3.5 years ago, but is today. So the next task we had in the spring of 2015 was, how do we get to this utopia that we had imagined, given where we are today? So we spent the next few weeks and months designing an onboarding process. So the purpose of this onboarding process was to be able to take any, or almost any, traditional development team as an input, and as the output, get a service delivery team that was working according to our Visma Cloud delivery model. So I thought I would give you a very high-level overview of that process. So the very first thing a team has to do if they want to onboard to this model is that they have to make sure that they are able to fulfill the roles that we have said are necessary for a successful service delivery team. The most obvious example might be, in our model, we are doing, I would say, quite an extreme form of DevOps, and you need to have infrastructure and operations competence in the team. So, for instance, you have to fill what we call the infrastructure engineer role. Another activity or group of activities is that each team, all the team members in each team, have to attend what we call kickoffs, and these are introductory sessions to different areas within the Visma Cloud delivery model. And the intention with these kickoffs is to ensure that everyone has a minimum level of awareness and knowledge about how to think and how to work within these different areas. So for instance, when we have a test kickoff with a team that is onboarding, we talk about, of course, the importance of test automation. We talk about how to have a process in the service delivery team that ensures that automated tests are created. We talk about the test automation pyramid. We talk about different relevant test techniques and tools. In the release kickoff, we talk about continuous delivery. We talk about the role of feature toggling. We talk about deployment automation and infrastructure as code as examples. An onboarding team will also perform several gap analyses. So the purpose of these is that a team will compare where they are today versus where they should be according to our model. So they will ask themselves a bunch of questions. Are we able to deploy a change to our service without impacting any users? Yes or no? If we have a critical incident, are we able to recover our service within 90 minutes? Have we automated the provisioning and configuration of any infrastructure or managed services that we are dependent on? Are we mature enough in terms of automated testing? And on it goes within these different areas that you see on the slide. Now, any deviations that the team finds, this is a self-evaluation exercise, they will document and add to their backlog. And they have to resolve all of these deviations as part of this onboarding process. So this is typically what takes the most time. And then in the final approval meetings, the team will summarize how they have fulfilled these requirements. So there is a little bit of a layer of verification involved here as well. So in our experience, this process takes anywhere from 2 to 12 calendar months. But at the end of it, we feel fairly confident that the team is a mature team, and that the cloud services that they are responsible for are mature cloud services. And we feel good that this team is actually able to handle the full responsibility for these cloud services. So in the summer of 2015, we piloted our initial draft of the model and our initial onboarding process on 3 teams. 2 of those teams onboarded in 4 months, while the third team canceled the onboarding because they were too far away from the target state. Today, we have 40 teams on this model, and we have an additional 40 teams in the pipeline. So in a year or two, hopefully, we will have 80 teams working according to this model. Then, in the fall and winter of 2015, a new question popped up for us. So after a team has onboarded to this model, how do we make sure that they continue to live the values of the model and that they continue to work the way we want them to work? How do we make sure that they even improve on that instead of stalling or even worse, regressing back to old behaviors? So we have developed some tools since then, and I thought I would share two of them with you. So the first is something, basically a VCDM retrospective process. So after a team has onboarded to our Visma Cloud Delivery model, then they are working according to the model, right? 3 months after they have been approved and ended the onboarding process, they will do a VCDM retrospective. So they will have an internal team meeting where they will discuss, are we working according to the model? And we have a list of questions or discussion points that they can use in that discussion. They will document possible improvements, and then we will have a summary meeting with them where we can ask some follow-up questions, maybe we can give some advice, and at least as importantly, that is also one of several arenas where we elicit feedback from the teams on the model itself. Because it's extremely important for us that this is not a static thing, static artifact. We need to continuously improve it so that our organization and our services improve. And we have made many major changes to the model since we started in 2015. After that initial retrospective, after 3 months, the teams will then do this again on a yearly basis. And this is, of course, in addition to whatever normal retrospective process that they have. The second tool in our toolbox that I thought I would mention is something we call maturity indexes. For the 40 teams that are onboarded to the model, we automatically calculate 3 numbers on a daily basis. Unfortunately, I won't have time to go into how they work, but the gist of it is that each team will have a number that expresses their security maturity. They will have a number that expresses their continuous delivery and DevOps maturity. And they will have a number that expresses their architecture and technology maturity. And these numbers are available to everyone in Visma, so that the teams can look at their own numbers, they can look at each other's numbers, internal stakeholders and management is also able to look at these numbers. And we have found that it's a really good way to drive continuous improvement within the teams and to follow up on the teams. So I'm going to start to wrap this up with some takeaways. And the first takeaway I want to mention is about public cloud. Early in 2015, we were really focused on DevOps and continuous delivery. But during that first year, it became evident how important public cloud platforms like Amazon Web Services and Microsoft Azure would be to our transformation. In fact, out of the 40 teams that are onboarded to the Visma Cloud Delivery model today, every single one of them are either hosted in Amazon Web Services or in Microsoft Azure. And I think there are 2 major factors for this. One is that the way we wanted to implement DevOps required 100% self-service inside of the different teams, right? So each of our 40 teams, they manage 3 or 4 or 5 Amazon accounts or Azure subscriptions where they control everything themselves. They are not reliant on some central bottleneck somewhere to do their work. They have full ownership and responsibility. And that was definitely a requirement for us. The second big factor is the automation that these platforms provide. The APIs that enable us to automate almost anything, and the infrastructure as code services. And it's hard for me to imagine that we could have achieved anything like we have achieved in a cloud environment that did not have these two factors. A few final parting thoughts. Since we had our workshops in the beginning of 2015, continuing on until today, I think we have been fairly good at including people with different types of competence and perspectives, developing and maintaining this model. That has definitely had a very positive impact on the quality of our work. We have also had people from different parts of the organization, which I think gave some additional legitimacy to our work, and it also helped ensure that we had strong ambassadors throughout the organization for a long time. If you are going to do anything similar to this, another requirement is that you have buy-in and sponsorship and support from all levels of management. And not just in the beginning, right? Because this is a long-term process. So you need management who is able to communicate enthusiastically about this on a continuous basis for the long term, and who is willing to make decisions in that direction. And finally, any change like this takes time and resources. If you prioritize this kind of work, there is something else that you cannot prioritize, right? And everyone has to realize that and be honest about that. But you can acknowledge that, yes, in the short and medium term, this will be an investment of time and resources, but it's an investment that you will get a significant return on in the long run. Thank you.